everybody, and welcome to today's TEA Wednesday webinar. My name is Erica, and I'm the Director of Operations for TEA and your producer for today. So happy all of you can join us. I have a few things before we get started. So one, please edit your name to be your first name, last name, and then your company or your type of membership, or I don't know, your favorite candy, something exciting. Today's event, we're going to follow more of a traditional webinar format. So if you guys could turn off your cameras, that would be great. At the end of the event, we are going to have a Q&A. Before that, we would ask that you guys put everything into the chat. You can test that out now, say hello to everybody. And with that, if you guys have any questions, you can type to me in chat, and I'll do my best to help you out. And with that, I'd like to introduce Xochi from the TEA Next Gen Committee. Hi, Xochi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good.
Hello, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Xochi Corey, and I'm a senior at UC San Diego studying speculative design with a focus in media. But I'm also from the Next Gen Committee, and I help run the events for the Western Division. So we're here today to talk about haunts and the creation of haunts. This kind of rooted from, at UCSD, we make haunts as Jared Walker, who just messaged in the chat, I work with him on them, and we noticed the student community getting more involved in the haunts industry. So we wanted to have a panel to talk about the creation of haunts, get to know from the people who are doing it every day, and just get to know a little bit more. Before we get started with introductions, I really quickly want to thank Dominic Diaz. If you're here, hi Dominic. He helped put this panel together, and I'm really grateful for him. So thank you so much, Dominic, for all your help with this. With that, I'd love to introduce our lovely panelists, starting with Bonnie.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Hallman. I am the Director of Creative at Myco2. Myco2 is a creative design firm in the themed entertainment space. We do a bunch of different elements of themed entertainment design and live show direction and writing and creative direction. But we also focus a lot on the Halloween industry and the haunt industry. We, for the past 10 seasons, have directed the talent over at Queen Mary's Dark Harbor. This past year, we also expanded, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, with Mr. Steve Sheldon, who's also a panelist. We expanded from Dark Harbor into Dark Horizons, which was a haunt in Orlando. Also at Myco2, I had the great honor of writing and directing the Horror Made Here, which was the WB haunt on the Warner Brothers backlot. And we've done some work for a couple other amusement parks as well, including Six Flags in the Halloween space. And we are thrilled to be here and chat with you guys.
Awesome. And for those UCSD kids out there, we know Horror Made Here quite well. As we temporarily were working with Warner Brothers on it, and eventually we're going to partner with y'all on it. So we're familiar with that one. We love that one. So we're gonna move on to David next.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is David Rusika. And if we talked about the West Coast, now we'll go to the East Coast, even though I live in LA, which is a little confusing. So I worked on Dark Horizon for the expansion of all of the spooky things that are happening on the Epic Entertainment side of stuff. I'm a freelance writer and creative director. I've done both things on the more Halloween side and things less Halloween-y for groups like Myco2 a bunch, Weta Workshop, Disney, and I also have done things more in the immersive theatrical world, like with JFI Productions' Creep and The Willows. And I worked through all the phases of stuff, whether it's coming up with the weird concepts we probably won't actually be able to make, all the way through to then having the horrible realization we're actually making them, and then we have to operate them. So I get to have all of that fun.
Awesome, thank you so much. Jamie?
Hi guys, my name's Jamie Berkowitz. I actually worked for Universal Studios Hollywood for Halloween Horror Nights for about 5 or 6 years. I started off getting the job kind of on accident. We could talk about that later, as a seasonal gig. For the first year we did the Jabberwocky show at Halloween Horror Nights, and then I kind of never left. And I worked my way up through production coordinator work, and then eventually over to the creative and art and design side of things, which was my ultimate goal. And so my most recent title was the supervisor of production design. So handling everything from with the creative and art and design teams from pre-production all the way through strike of all the designing of the mazes, the putting together of all the mazes, striking them, operations, all of it. Obviously 2020 is kind of a dumpster fire, so currently not working on Halloween Horror Nights, but hopefully one day can return to that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. And finally, we have Steve.
Hey everybody, my name is Steve Sheldon. I am the co-founder, managing partner of Epic Entertainment Group. We're a full-service production company focused on themed entertainment, live events, immersive experiences. And we really typically handle everything from soup to nuts, from ideation to creative development through production and operation. But we're also lucky enough to be brought in by some of our clients to just help with areas that they need support in, whether it be just operations or consulting on the creative development side. So we're kind of able to be there for our clients in whatever capacity they just need additional support. And we're possibly best known for being the executive producers of the Queen Mary's Dark Harbor, as well as Dark Horizon, which was mentioned earlier, by Bonnie and David. And we've also done a lot of events outside of the haunt realm and holiday and Scottish festivals and cultural.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to move through some questions right now. The first one I want to start with is I want to go with Bonnie and Steve to talk a little bit more about Queen Mary Dark Harbor and Dark Horizons and your work together and the process for making one of these events.
Ooh, Bonnie, do you want to start?
I was about to say, Steve, do you want to talk about it? I'll talk about Dark Harbor, which is the one that's in Queen Mary on Long Beach. We are extraordinarily fortunate for the past 10 years. This actually ran for a lot longer than when we started. We came in 10 years ago. It was actually under the producing company of Ceruto, and they changed a haunt that was called Shipwreck to this new haunt called Dark Harbor. And we are given just this beautiful gift of having this haunt on the gorgeous Queen Mary, which you can't buy that kind of production design. So it's extraordinarily lovely to have this grand, massively historic ship with all these wonderful stories on the backdrop. And we have anywhere between our mazes fluctuate. And I actually on the panel, we were just on a panel about Dark Harbor a few days ago, and I learned that on the East Coast, mazes are usually called houses. So here we call them mazes. So we had, so anyway, our mazes or houses, wherever you may be located, fluctuates between, Steve, it's like between 6 and 8 usually a year?
Yeah, usually 6, and we've been up to 7. 6
Oh, up to 7, yeah. 6 is where we usually are. Yeah, and so we pull a lot of the stories from the stories of the ship. We've got reoccurring characters. Steve and his company Epic are on the production side and managing all of that. Myco 2 comes in, and under the incomparable David Wally, we handle all the talent. So we hire anywhere upwards between 400 to 450 actors. We usually have about 200 of those actors on per night. We fill these mazes with these incredible haunt actors and basically direct that talent and manage that talent. And Steve is pulling out his hair, managing all of the operations while we do that, which I can pass off to you now to chat about that.
Yeah, it's, as Bonnie said, the Queen Mary is possibly just the biggest gift that we could imagine having in the world of haunts, because she has been named by Time Magazine one of the 10 most haunted places in the world. And I think Bonnie and I can probably both tell you that yes, she is really haunted. We have had it. I know I personally have had experiences there. A lot of our crew have had experiences there. So it's just it's a great opportunity for us as creative people to be able to come in and take story that already exists, take reality and be able to fictionalize it a little bit and create these very compelling, engaging stories with our mazes on the West Coast. And we really focus and lean into the history of the ship and tying in actual spirits and stories that people have shared of their encounters with spirits aboard the Queen Mary, and turning those into interactive and immersive maze experiences. And over the years, we've focused more on creating experiences both in and outside of the mazes, so that everyone who comes to the event can be entertained and have a great time, and they're not just don't feel like they're just spending their time in line to get to the next maze. So it's been a great evolution for us to be able to be a part of this event, and really I don't want to say turn the tide of the event, but it had been rebranded when Bonnie and David came aboard, and 10 years ago I came aboard shortly after, and the evolution that the event has seen since all of us came aboard and really started focusing on the history and tying that in has been phenomenal.
That's awesome. I'm very sad I missed out on Queen Mary Dark Harbor last year, but hopefully next year's the year. So it sounds like a lot of work does go into these attractions. So I wanted to move on to Jamie and David. Let's talk about why you like doing this sort of thing. Why do you like making haunts?
I'll let Jamie, if you want to kick it off.
So I actually didn't used to like haunted houses. When I say I fell into this career, I truly mean it, that it was an accident. I've always loved Halloween, and it's been always one of my favorite holidays, but I was never really into horror and any scary movies or anything like that. So when I was put on the project, I was kind of like, this is my hell. This is not what I want to do. But weirdly enough, I fell in love with it immediately. Soon it just like encapsulated my whole life. And now I feel like one of my identities is horror. So the reason why I think I love it so much is that it's a whole different kind of thrill than what I'm used to making in themed entertainment or entertainment in general. Fear is such a crazy emotion that we all feel. And it's an adrenaline rush for a lot, which is kind of, I guess, why some people love horror, some people don't, depending on how you react to that adrenaline rush. So I personally love making the haunts because we're kind of taking that to the next level. Watching a scary movie is one thing, but when you put your guests in the center of those movies or those stories, whether it's an IP related or an original concept, you're kind of putting them in the center of their greatest fears. Which sounds really sick and twisted that we enjoy doing that to people. But if you've ever worked at one of these events or got to just like sit back and watch from the cameras, or just watch the guests come out at the end of the mazes or attraction, seeing them scream, drop to the ground, and then like laugh afterwards, seeing that roller coaster of emotion is just a crazy feeling to watch. It's so insane to me that we can evoke so much emotion from these guests by putting them through this torment essentially, but still have them have fun with it. So I that's why I love themed entertainment in general, is putting people in the middle of those storylines rather than watching something on a screen or a stage. They're getting to experience it with all of their senses. So I personally, that's why I love it. It's a little sick and twisted, but there's something about all the different emotions that people go through and watching that, and how we can create so many different emotions come out of different guests.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I also, in a way, when I was a kid, I was a humongous wimp about anything having to do with Halloween and haunted attractions. I actually was so afraid of not just seeing a Halloween costume, but wearing one, that the first Halloween costume I ever had was my mom made me a flower garden for Halloween. So if you go from that to that, now I have like made and also like attended extreme haunted houses like Blackout and Heretic. It's a pretty big spectrum. But I actually came to Halloween specifically through the theme park industry and being a huge fan of theme parks, specifically one on Jamie's Wall, the Haunted Mansion at Disney. I came upon the whole industry by accident because I was looking for stuff as a huge super Haunted Mansion nerd, and came across Kevin McCurdy's Haunted Mansion, which is a haunted house in New York. And I didn't even know any of this stuff could happen or exist. And for me, what it became really quickly, because I made my first haunted attraction when I was 13. I just asked a local country club if they had any space for something, and they said, sure, here's our maintenance shed. It's 3,000 square feet. Have fun. And but I had never been involved with the stuff. The thing that really kept me going was it felt like the easiest way for me to make a theme park in my backyard. Like that was my intro into the themed entertainment world, because it's a scale that, even though these events can be very grand, felt approachable to me as like a teenager just desperately wanting to get involved in making live experiences of some kind. And then, I mean, now it's stuck because, as Jamie sort of mentioned, I just have a weird imagination and like things on the darker side. But I will honestly still say some of the most memorable things I have seen in live experiences come from haunted attractions, immersive horror, extreme haunted houses. Some of the imagery, some of the way that guests are moved through the experience are the top for me of anything in the live themed entertainment space.
Kind of reassuring to hear, because I used to be afraid of everything, and I'm sure people in this call can attest to that, and that I still kind of am, but I've fallen in love with this world and this world of work. So it's reassuring to hear that. Thank you, Jared. I appreciate that. So I wanted to jump back a little bit to process. And Bonnie, I wanted to talk a little bit more about Horror Made Here and the process you and your team took when working with another company, especially such a big company such as that, and follow up with Jamie talking a little bit more about Halloween Horror Nights and their process.
Sure. It was very interesting. You know, the WB presented some challenges. The beauty with Dark Harbor is it's a kind of its own IP. It's an original IP that we have all created and have a little bit of creative control over. So therefore can take a little bit of leeway here and there when we need to. A Horror Made Here presented challenges in that we were not only trying to, of course, appease guests and make guests have a wonderful experience, but, and Jamie can attest to this, I'm sure, in many ways, shape, or forms, you're dealing with the approval process from all of these different IPs, all these very big IPs. So I found, we found ourselves in this weird spot where it was like, you couldn't always hire the best actor. You had to hire the person that fit the role, which was kind of an interesting place to be. And so it was, it was just ensuring that, we always say this all the time, and even outside of the haunts, we tend to work with a lot of studios and a lot of big studio IPs at Myco too. And it's funny, instead of calling ourselves creative directors, we like to call ourselves ambassadors, because so much of your job is just standing in the middle of all of these people who need to give approvals and trying to like make sure that this person feels heard, make sure that this person feels heard, make sure that this IP holder feels heard. Oh, this person who owns the estate of the IP needs to feel heard. And so that was very interesting on the backdrop of a haunted attraction, because like David actually mentioned, and something that he brought up, which I love, and part of the reason I love this industry is not only haunt people are a very special brand of people, and they're a very inclusive and supportive brand of people. And part of that is that you can do these very big, large scale attractions, and just as well, you can do these small scale attractions. And so it was interesting to find ourselves against the backdrop of this very big attraction, trying to bring the intimacy of haunt to it. And so, you have to just start with the story. You have to make sure that, we did Arkham Asylum, we did Conjuring, we did Exorcist, there's another, Freddy versus Jason. And so we just needed to start with those stories and ensure that we were building casts of characters that people would love. And then between those moments of, okay, I recognize that Nun from The Conjuring, I recognize Reagan from, Exorcist. And between those moments, we had plenty of jump scares that we could include people of all types and take people, through different elements of the story, so you weren't just giving them book reports of a movie they'd seen 1,000 times.
So I got to attend that event and see some of the backside of it earlier this summer during my internship, and I thought it was definitely a phenomenal event. Jason coming out of the water blew my mind.
Yes, we had a very cinematic, beautiful moment, and bless those actors' hearts because it was cold. So we threw a bunch of these poor, and of course our Jasons are these big teddy bear guys. Jason had to be over 6'3", so we had all these big 6'3" guys that we just shoved into wetsuits, and we were like, get in the water. And so these poor guys had to spend their entire nights like hiding behind a dock, shivering in water. And as guests passed, they would come out of the water, and it was one of the most stunning, most beautiful cinematic things that I had ever seen at a haunt before. And then this poor guy would have to shiver and go back behind the dock. And so I tell you one thing right now, if you're going to get into haunts, you bless your haunt actors. Haunt actors are the hardiest, most trained people, and always be nice to them.
Yeah, certainly not a glamorous thing to go into for really.
Or even Steve, even on the ship. I mean, those mazes on the ship are amazing, but they are like 175 degrees. And so it's like, oh, you have to scream all night and wear a mask. Now do it in literal hell in this 175 degree heat.
Yeah.
I do have to say, so I was shadowing sneakily in the shadows Bonnie on the night that they actually got that effect to work for the first time. And it was really one of the most memorable experiences in my career, just watching the creative team and all the executives get super excited to actually see that thing that had been floating around in their heads be real, and watch guests get scared by it and react the first time. So I think those are the moments that in the middle of all the chaos, we look back and say, oh yeah, like that's a high point for our careers.
I remember I was with 2 students from UCC, and I saw it. I was like, guys, look at this. Look at, I freaked out. I still have a video of it. I thought it was amazing. So sorry.
It's good. No, well, it brings up a really good point, because sometimes you have these moments in your head, and it takes so much effort, and you end up fighting for these moments so much. And sometimes you do need to just kind of let those go and go, okay, what battle do I want to fight for today? But sometimes they really are worth it, because the fact that 2 years later we're all talking about this one moment, and it really is truly beautiful. It was truly beautiful, but find those moments, and if you know they're special, then fight for them. That's actually a really good point.
I would say it's kind of inspiring to see that you had such a difficult effect such as this, and you're able to achieve it. For those of us working on haunts now, when we think of those crazy things, you just got to stick to it. Awesome. Jamie, would love to jump in a little bit more about Halloween Horror Nights and the process you had when working that.
So we like to call Halloween Horror Nights a year-round job, because sometimes we even call it an 18-month job, because we are starting next year's as we're still working on the current year's. So it's just like a constant cycle, which can be kind of shocking to a lot of people who aren't familiar with the haunt industry. And when we tell them what we do, is that my job is Horror Nights year-round, and sometimes I get to work on other things. So our process, we work a lot with IPs. Sometimes we do have original maze concepts, but Universal Studios Hollywood's Halloween Horror Nights is very IP based. So it really does start with our creative director, John Murdy, and our director, Chris Williams. They are the masterminds of Halloween Horror Nights. They're the ones who, before we're even opening the current year's Halloween, are already in talks with what we're going to do next year. And maybe even bringing IP holders through the mazes and already writing. It's pretty insane. So it really starts with them. They're the ones who write the treatment. Chris does the main ground plan sketch. And I've been very blessed to be able to work so closely with them and kind of get my training in this industry under 2 great guys, because just hearing Chris being in his office and him just walking through the ground plan with me and explaining where scares are going and why, and kind of working through problems has been just like the best learning experience for me, that I know I'm very grateful for, that not everyone gets to have. So after it goes through them, it kind of is like a trickle down effect for us. It slowly goes down to like this pyramid of the information. It goes down to Brandy Creason, who works directly underneath Chris Williams, and she starts doing the main refined ground plan. And then we go to our show set designers, and then we bring in audio and lighting, then props, then scenic, then all of these things that it's kind of insane how quickly the team grows and how much our process grows. But it starts very at the core with just 2 people bouncing ideas off of each other. for us, it's chaos, you know, especially working for the art and design side of things. You know, we're a very small team that comes very shocking to most. Our art team is usually 4 of us, you know, out there. And as we get more and more mazes every year, it gets more and more chaotic that we're, you know, 4 or 5 people on this art team are just running around like chickens with their heads cut off, going to each maze. But teamwork is very important, and we're just constantly shifting, and it's just nonstop, just rounds. Usually when we're in the thick of install during the summer, meeting with the scenic vendors, meeting with the props, meeting with the lighting. It's kind of like round the clock work during the last like 2 weeks too. You know, we would be there, you know, some of us would have night shifts, some of us would have daytime shifts. It's pretty chaotic. It's such a long and tedious process that I enjoy so much. But it's very hard to explain to people like what exactly all goes into it. And I'm sure everyone else on this call can attest to that it's just the amount of detail that goes into a lot of haunts that you don't even think about is something that I love to kind of talk to people about. Because, you know, we all know about the scenic and the props and the actors, but just little things of like operating a haunt is insane. You know, safety is a big one. And we constantly have to think, especially now, about the safety of our guests and our performers. So how are we keeping, you know, a safe distance between people, or what happens if an emergency happens? You know, putting cameras in a maze, but also making sure that you can't see the cameras because we don't want to ruin the scene. There's so much that goes into it, and it's all a temporary attraction, which is the craziest part about all this. We put in so much detail and work as if it's a permanent attraction, but it gets all torn down at the end of the year. So it's just all those little details that I guess I always tell people when they want to get into the haunt industry is to really kind of figure out those details. Those are things that you kind of learn as you get into the industry, but always thinking, you know, about the safety of the guests, the flow of the guests, why a scare may or may not be in a certain area. Is it dangerous? What if the person gets scared over here and then falls into a window over here? That can't happen. It's crazy things like that we're always, our minds are going a million miles a minute. And it's what makes this job so interesting and fun for me, but also very chaotic.
It's sometimes harder, I think, in a lot of ways, mounting and building a temporary attraction than it is even a permanent attraction, because the measures that you have to take to make sure that people are safe, and you know, there aren't the permanent, you know, signage elements and things that permanent buildings and structures have, and you have to make sure that all of that is called out even more more blatantly in a temporary attraction, to make sure that people see them and understand what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to go in case of emergency.
100% agree. It's very funny because it's, you know, the different coding that you have to work with and all of that, but also, you know, when you're building for temporary, haunt actors are rough on stuff, and haunt guests are rough on stuff. And so it's, okay, how do I make this temporary but permanent enough to stand up to a very hands-on and aggressive group of people? It's a really kind of fine line and conundrum you often find yourself in when you're designing these.
When it comes into the immersive horror side too, the thing I've seen, when you add the element of touch and the actors and guests being able to be in contact as well, especially from the safety side, the you know, insurance, making sure you can not only get the right insurance but articulate correctly what it is you even do, is kind of an adventure every time.
That's a really good point. And David brings up a good point that we kind of live in this, we essentially live in kind of an escape room audience time, where audiences are getting more used to an immersive theater and more used to the idea of, oh, touch is a part of it, which is super exciting and it's what we want. But as designers, it's also something you have to constantly think about. If you have a door, the door has to be locked, because if you don't lock the door, a guest is going to go through it. You know, things like that, you know, emergency exits that you have to, you know, hide pretty well, because a guest will go through it unless they, you know, even if they're not supposed to. It's really interesting. We notice it, Micah too does a lot of like experiential marketing activations as well, where it's a lot of an immersive experience where you're encouraged to touch things. And if you don't want someone to touch something, then you can't put it out there.
Well, and you never you'll never know exactly what the audience is going to find or do that you're never expecting, but they're gonna do something you're not expecting. So the testing side is super important, and I'm sure all of us have stories, horror stories, weird stories, funny stories about that.
It's one of my favorite things is we build, we create these experiences, and as Jamie said, we spend, a year or 18 months or however long we spend envisioning what we're creating and envisioning how guests are going to use the space and what they're going to be most interested in. And then we get to actually watch and see how they really do use the space and what they're most interested in, what they gravitate toward, and are the things that we envision being, the big moments and the big scares, do those translate? Is that what the big scare is? Or is somebody most interested in this little, afterthought that we didn't even, really think was going to be a big deal, and just kind of put it over there?
It happens all the time.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Awesome. David, I wanted to jump back to you because you mentioned immersive horror. I'd love to hear a little bit more about immersive horror stuff you have worked on, the difference between those projects and how you approach those and hunts.
Yeah, so it depends. Generally speaking, most of the immersive horror stuff I work on is not as IP recognizable, like film or TV IP correlated. Although one of the first years, actually the first year I worked with Creep LA, we were doing a production called Creep Lore based on the Amazon Prime series, the TV series that they were streaming. But I think the biggest things still apply. I mean, the most unusual part, as we mentioned, is already like touch, but as well, the scale is very different. I worked on a project last year called I Want to Live in Your Mouth. That was a show that I wrote and directed. And it was for one audience member at a time for a 20-minute experience. And I think the things we already talked about end up being really true. So, I mean, we were lucky we worked with the Henson Creature Shop on puppets for that show. And we had all this stuff that we needed to do in terms of thinking about how to make the audience feel active. I think that's the biggest thing where immersive horror comes in and experiential activations. But I think all the lines are blurring. Haunted attractions are doing more and more of this stuff. But the idea that you can be active, you are the focus of the story, you're not just sort of watching the story happen, you have an active role in it, is a huge part of what immersive horror experiences focus on. And it's really different when it's an audience of 4 people and you want to make everyone feel engaged. Some people don't want to be in the spotlight. How you allow them to feel the right kind of discomfort, because in our business we do play a lot in uncomfortability, but we want them to not feel made fun of or made, the butt of anything. But you have to do so much more thought in terms of the psychology of, okay, so if I'm just one person and I'm moving through a scene like Steve mentioned, if you don't have an audience member in front of you to know where to go next, we have to look at the psychology of how lighting, how sound, how the actors and touch and these other elements can really not only get inside the guest's head, but also help move them to where we need them to go from a safety standpoint. So, I see the worlds really feeding each other well. All the immersive horror stuff I do brings ideas of what if we did this on a larger scale in the themed entertainment, haunted attraction side, and vice versa.
That's so cool. I'm slowly learning more about the immersive horror side and those types of experiences. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on them and hear about the stuff you've worked on.
Well, and the one thing I also will mention is the idea of the big things going to smaller things. I mentioned the Haunted Mansion. A lot of the immersive horror stuff that's small groups is really a themed entertainment dark ride. We're turning the people that are walking through into the ride vehicle, but the principles end up translating so much that anybody who's trying to study this or make their own attractions in their backyard like I did will find that those skills are directly transferable to the bigger productions they do.
That's really helpful. Thank you. All right, we're gonna move through our last couple questions and then we'll move on to the Q&A. So if y'all want to start dropping your questions into the chat, and if you have a specific person you want to ask it to, please go ahead. So Steve, we're gonna start with you this time. So what is your favorite attraction you've worked on, and what did you learn from it?
You know, Dark Harbor has a really special place in my heart personally. It's the attraction that I've worked on the longest. It is a very, it's a special attraction all the way around, in part because of the family that comes together year after year. A lot of the same people have been involved for the past 10 years, some even longer, but before it was Dark Harbor, when it was Shipwreck. And it's kind of like a family reunion every year when people come back together and are all in. You know, everybody is all in to develop and create the best experience for our guests. So it's that family element that I really love about it, but also the history. I'm a history buff myself, and to be able um, to marry this IP that we've been able to create with real history and real stories and create immersive experiences out of it has been just a huge blessing. It's almost like writing fan fiction and being able to bring what you've written to life and see people go through it and enjoy it. So that has been a blast. Being able to also focus on the experiences outside of the mazes and really make sure that our guests are entertained from the moment they walk onto the property to the moment they leave, that they have a great experience. We have been very blessed with the client that we have there at the Queen Mary. They give us a just incredible amount of leeway and have a lot of trust in the team that has been developed over the years, and that we have the best interest of the property and of the guest at heart. So pretty much anything that we have pitched to them, no matter how off the wall and crazy it might seem, has been okay. If you guys think it's the way to go, let's test it out and not be afraid to fail. If it fails, let's test it. So having that freedom and that creative license has been everything and a huge part of the success. So I think Dark Harbor is my favorite. The other, Dark Horizon, which we launched last year, and I was able, we were very lucky to work with both David and Bonnie and Micah too. That was also a lot of fun because once again, we got to create this experience and create these stories from scratch. And we really leaned in heavily to the history and the lore of the local area in Florida. And we had a haunted house. We learned that very quickly. It's a house, not a maze, on the East Coast. That we had a house that was inspired by the very first serial killer in Florida, Bloody Ed Watson. And that was a true story. And we kind of, obviously fictionalized that and created a really great experience out of it. And what one of our reviewers called a haunt nightclub, I think is what he called it, which was, I think, the biggest compliment that we could have gotten.
That's so cool. I love that. To Jamie, I wanted to jump to you for this question too. I know that you have mostly worked HHN specifically, but is there a specific maze or attraction within that event that you enjoyed the most, and what did you learn from it?
I hate this question because I have so many favorites. I think one of my big favorites that I worked on was 2 years ago, or 3 now, was when we did the first Universal Monsters maze. It was the first year that I kind of moved over to the art department officially. So I was an art coordinator for the time, working in the field a lot. And that maze specifically was really back to basics for us, as I like to see it. We get to work with all these really awesome IPs, but that one goes back to our core of Universal and Universal Monsters, and just going back to where it all kind of started. And that was like a very amazing learning experience because it was, first of all, a massive maze. We kind of took our plaza area, which is usually more of like a scare zone, and made it like a first half of the maze. And then you exit and then you go into the second half. And then once you exit the actual maze, you go onto a scare zone. So it was like a 3-parter. It was just massive. And it was really interesting to get to take all these original monsters, and we were trying to put an awesome twist on it, which was a very big learning experience for us on the creative side. Is like, how do you take these really old movies and make them more relevant to the current generation, and also not be, the same thing, but also not make them too far-fetched where people are like, what is this? This is not Frankenstein. This isn't the Wolfman. That one was very interesting for me. And we also got to do some really cool effects throughout that maze. And that maze is also in one of the most difficult locations, what we call the Parisian courtyard, which is just space between buildings, essentially. If anyone's been to Universal Studios Hollywood for our Horror Nights, we sometimes have to put mazes in crazy areas, just like the queue line of Jurassic Park, or just like the space between a building. Because we are limited on the space that we have, specifically on like the upper lot of the park. So that maze is very twisted, and there's all these kind of different barriers we have to jump through. We can't just put up a regular tent, so also some of it isn't covered. So that maze was very challenging, at least for me personally, but it was also very rewarding because I think it came out to be one of the best mazes we've produced. It was a huge hit. And then I also really loved working on Ghostbusters last year. Obviously, I'm a big fan. And doing Ghostbusters last year was just a really big dream come true. It was one of my favorite movies my whole life. But then we also had some like insane challenges that we had to work through. The facade of that maze was massive. It was like the biggest facade we've ever had of the firehouse. And then at the end of the maze, there was a giant, foam hard-coated Stay Puft Marshmallow Man with a projection face. And I remember, like, to go back to those conversations we were having about an idea that someone has that's like difficult, and you're trying to jump through all these hoops to kind of see it. You kind of have to pick and choose your battles, especially in haunts. And sometimes, like the famous saying, kill your darlings goes, like sometimes you just gotta be like, it's not gonna work and we can't do it. And maybe we can try it another year, but we can't do it. That was one of those instances that we like made it work. And to see the guests come through at the end, after we produced this giant Stay Puft Marshmallow Man that is angry with all these great like proton pack beams coming out of it. It was such a learning experience because we were learning on the fly of how to do this. We were like, wow, what do we make this out of? What is the face? Is the face projection? What happens if the projector goes out? Like all these questions that we have never done before, but it was very rewarding at the end to see the final product and be very happy with it. It also gave us confidence of like what we can do in the future. How do we take this technology and these ideas that we made for this maze and move them into another maze in another year and, kind of grow on top of that.
I think that's an important point, especially with what we do, is to never be limited by something that you don't know how it's going to get done, or you don't know, or it's never been done before. I think being willing to take those risks and take those leaps and do things that people haven't seen or people haven't done, and you have to kind of make your own way and figure it out, are what create the best experiences.
If you couldn't tell, I very much enjoyed the Marshmallow Man effect last year.
Yes.
I was very happy to get a picture of it. So we're going to move on, and we're going to skip to our last question to make sure we have time for Q&A. But y'all are brilliant professionals in the haunts industry. What advice can you offer to people looking to move into this direction, whether it be haunts in your yards or going into events such as Horror Made Here, Halloween Horror Nights, Not Scary Farm? Let's start with David.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, and this is maybe more of a philosophical question about why we make these kinds of experiences. I think that especially right now when we can't necessarily be as hands-on making them, it's a really great time to research and really get deeper into things that have nothing to do with the haunted attraction themed entertainment industry. I've pulled some of my most valuable inspiration from art and fashion and molecular gastronomy and history, like Steve mentioned, and learning about and working with different voices and cultural perspectives that we don't always get to see in our industry. I feel like that learning it's actually one of those rare things where in our business, like the learning, which is just getting to consume the stuff you love, actually is really important to do. And then beyond that, I also feel like there are so many events around. There's opportunities will continue to grow. I think the thing that's important for me to explore right now is what is your perspective? Like trying to figure out what do you want to bring? Why are you creating these dark experiences? Because I think it will help differentiate the product that you work on. And then the other big thing for me personally is just don't be afraid to start off with the really scrappy stuff. I was a scare actor at Halloween Horror Nights in Orlando. I was in stage management at Halloween Horror Nights Orlando. The stuff that you learn from being on the ground ends up being some of the most important things you'll ever learn.
I will second that people say it all the time in the themed entertainment industry is that your experiences being on the operation side or down and in the trenches of the event is very valuable. The things that you learn is so important to then bring that to the table. So many things that I learned from my first year or just being an attendee or working operations of the event, really I pulled those learnings into what I do now because I know how guests react because I had to deal with them so much. Or as a scare actor, what makes a good scare, like what needs to go into it or what makes your hide comfortable and safe. Like just so many different things that I think it's really important. So if you're looking for a place to start, just see what you can get in any of these attractions. If you can get a job, it doesn't matter what it is. I think that you will be able to take those learnings and put them towards your future work.
It's also sorry, go ahead, Bonnie.
No, go ahead, Steve, please.
I was just going to say it's been interesting to watch because a lot of people get into haunts and think that they want to do one thing, but as they get into it and they see other departments and how other departments work, it's like maybe I'd be more interested in being over there. So I would say keep an open mind too, and just be willing to go where your interests draw you and where you feel most passionate about, because just because you enter in one place doesn't mean you have to end there. And no matter where you end up, I think, as David just said, don't be afraid to get into the gritty stuff. I, as one of the executive producers on the floor at Dark Harbor, am often the one running trash in the VIP area because the people are backed up and it needs to be done. So just don't be afraid or unwilling to do anything on any level.
100%. All of this is exactly what I tell everybody. And I've done a lot of panels this month, and not just about horror, but about just themed entertainment in general. And the best piece of advice I have to anybody is do not get caught up in titles. Titles mean nothing in this industry. Like, so many people are like, no, I have to be a this, I have to be a that. Every single title in every single company is completely different from the next company. It's the job, it's the work. So don't get caught up in a title. Don't say, no, that's not the kind of title I want. That's not the kind of job I want. If you don't want to work in an industry, get what you can in there. And then that gives you the opportunity, as Jamie and David said too, like starting out in operations, starting out as a scare actor. The best directors are the ones who were actors. The best producers are the ones who were operators. It's when you have a brain for both sides of that, you're going to be better overall no matter what. So stop getting hung up on, I want to be a creative director, I will only be a creative director. That's ridiculous. It's going to make you a terrible creative director.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the great advice. I definitely have it written down, so I'm very excited. But now we're going to move through the questions that are in the chat, so I will read them out. This first one's from Ryan Sam Marshall. With guests touching things inside the mazes, as well as the main scare not being the focus for guests, do you ever adjust the maze on the fly, or is it more nailed down to maintain the safety you've put into place? And how fluid are the shows?
Every single night.
I'm laughing because every night, without fail, if you could shadow one poor tech person during a haunt, you will watch them do nothing but answer radio calls of the window got ripped off, a door got ripped off, a nail is exposed in the thing, something. And also, I do have a funny story. Jamie, I remember during one Halloween, and I was working at another project at Universal, and I can't remember what it was, but I just remember seeing you like running across Universal as Halloween was as it was starting, and you were like, I'm taking a door away from an actor, and then you just kept running. And yes, so you just have to. Sometimes you just
that.
Yeah.
They like to slam doors and then break them. And you have to constantly get the call, the very glamorous job of many people who have to do that, as I did, is be the production contact. If you get the radio call being like, the door's off the hinges for this scare, and you go on and you got to go in and fix it or call the people to fix it. And you tell the scare actor a million times, stop, use it. This is to get into your scare and to get out. You're not scaring through the door. Stop it. And then they love to take creative liberties with their scares. I appreciate it. I love it, but you gotta listen sometimes. And then I had told someone, I remember this because I tell the story a lot, and I remember this person the door came off like 3 times a night. And I just was like, you don't get a door. I'm putting a curtain up and you get a curtain now because we're not responsible to have doors. Because I just get so frustrated. And that's from like the scare actor side. And then from like the, or from the guest side, guests, when they go through mazes, turn into 5-year-olds in like a jewelry shop. They have to touch everything. They want to pick up everything. And it's so fascinating because when I go through one, and I was never like that. I was like, I don't want to touch anything. I'm going to stay here in my bubble and get through this maze. But so many guests are so fascinated by our dressings and stuff that they want to touch it or take a souvenir. So I know for us, we glue down everything. Everything is glued down, nailed down, spray adhesive. Last year in Ghostbusters, we had the library cards everywhere, and I was in there spraying adhesive and sticking them. There was not a loose library card anywhere to be found because that people will touch them. And it's also a safety thing because people will also not realize it's glued down, and they'll go for a candlestick and yank it, and then it's like this broken piece, and then we gotta like go in and take it out. And I'm sure every person who's worked in haunts can identify with this, is that things will be taken, things will be touched, even if you don't think so. It's amazing to walk through the mazes even the next morning and take notes on everything that needs to be fixed.
One thing that Ryan's question makes me think about too, that is from a design perspective, is there is sort of a ripple effect, because when you set a look in a maze based on like the fire marshal and they agree on the way that a design is set up, you might have a moment where you want to get a different flow from the scare, and that involves moving a piece of furniture or something, but then that potentially closes off an ADA path for, having enough room for a wheelchair to go through. So there are so many interesting things that like a little tiny thing you want to adjust can have a bigger impact. So I know a lot of us have to deal with that all the time too.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. We actually have at Dark Harbor and Dark Horizon also, we had fire department walking through nightly before we could open the doors, just to make sure nothing had changed, nothing had moved. And then they walked through, random tours throughout the night in each maze as well, just to make sure that doesn't happen.
Wow, it's just a lot. I'm thinking now about our next haunt and how we're gonna definitely make sure everything's nailed down. We usually kept it out of reach, and we're generally okay, but also it's cold, so I don't know what's going through their heads half the time. So we're moving on to our next question from Bart. Hello, I was wondering how you all deal with safety regulations here in NL. The scare industry is still really small. And with that, we've had quite some troubles getting, for example, permits from the fire brigade, and also have no idea, as they have no idea how to inspect it according to the law. So right now, our safety is common sense.
We, last year, maybe the most difficult event, definitely the most difficult event that I've ever opened, has been Dark Horizon in Orlando. We went there, and it was literally 2 years that we kind of creatively worked on the concept for this event. But we had a very short amount of time. I think we got the thumbs up that the event was actually happening in April to open it in October. So to be able to really mount the event and create the event in such a short amount of time was a challenge to begin with. But then being in a new city where we didn't have tons of relationships and all of that, there was a huge learning curve. And what we did and the way we got around it was we literally went to the city. We went and met with the fire marshal. We met with all of the people personally and said, here is exactly what we want to do. What are your concerns and how can we address them? And we just worked with them as closely as we could. I mean, we were at the point of harassing them to come and do inspections. At one point, The lady, like a week before we were opening, the fire department had not been out in a couple of weeks to do an inspection. And this lady called me and she said, I don't want to freak you out, but the fire marshal's coming today to do an inspection. I said, thank God. So we actually have a few days to make adjustments if we have to make adjustments. So I would say understanding what the safety concerns are from all aspects, from everyone who could have a concern, and just making sure that you're on top of it and addressing those and having an open line of communication is the most important.
I think, Steve, you're very right with the open line of communication. The other thing to remember when you're dealing with the fire marshal is that though it sounds like it shouldn't be, it kind of is a little bit subjective, which doesn't make sense as you're bringing it out loud. But when you start to do these things over and over again, you'll start learning the different people that they'll send out, and you'll start meeting these fire marshals. And you have the very, very strict ones, and you have the ones that are a little bit less so. And so sometimes something that you have not changed at all will pass through one and not through another. And it's just go with the flow. Like, here's the thing, you can't fight the power on that. If the fire marshal says no, the fire marshal says no. So keep your cool, keep your calm, keep a good head, and say, what do we need to do to fix it? And exactly what Steve had to do with those folks in Orlando, because that was a fun little adventure. but it's just keep your head and try and solve the problem. Take one problem, fix it, work to the next problem, fix that problem, and just keep going through, because it's going to get very overwhelming. And don't let it overwhelm you. Don't let that part of it stop you, because it can feel like it will.
Yeah, to your point, Bonnie, we had, again in Orlando, we had the day of opening, a new representative from the fire department came through and said, your railings aren't at the correct height here, and they need to be adjusted throughout this entire maze. And we said, but the code says 32 to 38 inches, and we're at 36 inches. And nope, I want them a little bit lower. They need to be an inch lower. Okay, we took out all the railings and reinstalled them with like an hour to spare to opening. So it's one of those situations where you could argue and you could fight it, and you might be right, but you're never going to be right when it comes to the fire marshal.
That's exactly it. I mean, do you want to be right or do you want to open? That's kind of one of the things that you find yourself up against. And sometimes you will find someone that's really, really difficult, and you kind of have to, you may roll your eyes, but you have to do it. So just, what do I need to do to get this open? And you'll find, as you start to really work with these different departments and safety, I know, Jamie, you can probably tell a good zillion stories about safety up at Universal, because that's a whole different beast and a whole different ball game. And it's the same kind of beast that we had at WB, because we had not only the city of Burbank, but also the safety of the lot, like the safety group that was on the lot, and that's intense as well. And sometimes you're going to get a person that's going to make it really challenging, and don't fight it. Just do what you need to do to open.
Awesome, thank you. We're gonna move on. I think we have time for about one or two more questions. So we're gonna go to this one from Dominic Diaz, which thank you again, Dominic, for helping put together this panel. From a design perspective, what do you see as the cost versus benefit of a triggered style scare? Events like HHN rely almost entirely on trigger-based scares, and Dark Harbor sits closely to the other side of the spectrum. So what do you see as the benefit or detriment to using those audio and light and trigger-based style scares?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, just because we manage mostly the talent side, especially at Dark Harbor, David Wally and myself and Aroy Carrion and our whole talent team. The beauty of a talent scare is they can adjust. That's something that we really love and we like to utilize quite a bit, is that, and I can let other people speak about the kind of technical scares. We do have a few at Dark Harbor. One of the things that we love the most is that drop bridge. We have a drop bridge over a however many feet boiler room, and so you really truly think you're about to fall down from a very, very high height, which is lovely and wonderful. But with actors, they can adjust to you. They can play with, if you have kind of a cocky guest going down, they know how to play to that, versus you have someone who's very scared and kind of what Jamie said, was in her own little bubble and just trying to make through. They can adjust to that. Or, you know, if you do have a guest that's trying to go through a door they're not supposed to, that's an opportunity for a scare that you weren't going to get from something that's mechanical. If you have a guest that's, you know, turning around and trying to go back the other way, you can scare them back in the right direction. The beauty of actor scares is that you can adjust, and it feels like a personalized experience for the guests, which is why I very much enjoy them and love technical scares. But the actor scare to me is the easiest to make it feel personalized.
I think it really depends on, you know, each situation. There's going to be a better way to do it depending on what your character is, what the maze is, where the area is. It really is, there's like a lot of factors that go into it. At least at Horror Nights, you know, it's sometimes the triggered technical scare is we would use as a way to kind of move the flow of the guests, you know, to, we don't want people lingering in a room too long. Then the technical scare was very easy because it was a very sharp, light effect, you know, a heavy sound that will scare the person, and, you know, scare actor might come out and kind of help push the actor or the guests into a certain direction for us. But on the flip side, maybe that doesn't work, and to still get the same effect, it's someone who's not in a triggered scare and is more can adjust to the room and kind of move with the guests or follow the guests in a certain way. It depends on the character, you know, is their character a quick jump scare type character, or is it more of a lingering, following you around, like eerie thing? I think it really depends on the scare, the maze. There's so many different factors. So I am like, you know, I like both, and it kind of just depends on the situation. Like Bonnie says, I really like the fluidness of, you know, the theatrical type scare, but I also do love, you know, the very cliche jump scare where it just comes out of nowhere and there's strobe lights and it just like catches you in a dark hallway. And it just really depends, I guess.
Variety is the spice of life.
Yes.
I think the best implementation of the triggered scares are when they can be married with an actor, with a live actor, where the triggered, you know, the triggered element is a distraction that distracts you from the live actor coming at you from the other direction. If I had my personal preference and an unlimited budget, every single triggered scare would have its own dedicated live actor, but that isn't always, you know, possible. So it depends on how you implement it and where you implement it as to how effective it is.
Awesome, thank you. Erica, do we have time for one more?
Let's do one more.
Awesome, thank you. So our last question comes from I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name. Mael. Okay, I'm gonna just go with that. Given the current state of the world affecting everything, how have you guys had to rethink haunts in terms of not just scenic design or operations, but the type of scares and horror you use that you think will stay long beyond the pandemic?
You know, I mean, the thing I would say is that I actually look at all of these. I was just talking about this with somebody yesterday. All of the creative parameters that are changing is a huge benefit, I feel like, in us continuing to be innovative and try new things. I love the fact that all of these things that are honestly like our sort of fail-safe tricks, we've had to say, can we still do that? Like, can we right now, can we still use fog like we do everywhere to create atmosphere? Can we still do these types of scares? And even when the pandemic is in a different sort of, you know, volume and people are starting to come back out to these attractions, you know, I really love that we're looking at the, not so much what the thing that we're doing to scare the guest is, but the psychology of why we're using that thing. So it's all still the same principles of scare and surprise. And I think the things we're using more for our design than we ever have before, like sound and like really getting creative with lighting, are things I've been wanting to see our industry do more of for a while. So in some ways, the necessity being the mother of invention is really good here.
Does anyone have anything to add?
No, just that is 100%. We Micro 2 has been very fortunate. We worked on the Lovecraft Country drive-in movie with Giant Spoon, and then just worked on the Halloween drive-through with Agency and Halloween. And both of those is exactly what David said. We had to utilize lighting and sound, and how do we creep people out without getting them face to face with actors, and how do we creep people out, you know, how do we tell story from so far away and when the guests are in the car. And it's leaning into these new technical experiences, and leaning into even understanding how can I be scary from a distance, which I think is something that, in terms of directing performers and in terms of placing actors in experiences, we're going to use long past COVID times and pandemic times, because we found some things that really work, which is lovely.
Our toolkit's going to be so much richer now as a result.
Yeah.
I think even possibly more troublesome than the figuring it out on the actor and the entertainment side is figuring it out on the operational side. Having to figure out exactly how do you corral and keep safe all of these guests if it's not a drive-in experience, which it's great that has popped up, and we've been able to see so much new and innovative entertainment come from that direction. But as we get back into having guests walking through experiences, it's going to be, how are we keeping guests safe amongst themselves? Because queue lines, social distancing in queue lines is going to be an interesting thing to tackle.
I think this is all really interesting to think about. As I mentioned earlier, UCSD, we run a haunt, and we ended up having to change it because of COVID, and it got moved with, like, when it got changed. I mean, I know I was sad, and I know a lot of people were sad, but our creative director, Matthias, who I think he's here, he just looked at the positive, like, look at what we can do, how we can innovate and change the experiences that people are doing. So I think that's a really good note to close off on for today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Xochi, and thank you, panelists. This has been a really great, creepy topic for this season, and I think that all of our members have really, really enjoyed this talk. Thank you, everyone, for attending. If you have feedback for us, please send it to memberservices@teaconnect.org. And we hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of your day or evening or wherever you are. But yeah, thank you, everyone.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.